We continue now at the top of Daf Mem Amud Aleph, Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 40a. On the previous summit, the Gemara was in the middle of a story of Mari Barisik. Mari Barisik was a powerful and wealthy man, and somebody came and said that I'm actually your brother. You owe me half of the property that you inherited from our father. And Rav Chisda eventually said it's true. He really does owe half the property. And then the brother also said he wants the improvement as well. And Rav Chisda brought from a Mishnah that that's also true. The improvement is also split. And the Gemara continues with V'chein Amar Rabba, and likewise Rabba says Hishbichu le'emtza, that the profit, the improvement rather, is also split in the middle. Rashi over here notes, V'chein Amar Rabba Hishbichu le'emtza lo garsinan. This line of Rabba also says, like the Mishnah, that the improvement is split between them. That should not be in the text of the Gemara. She'ein ze lashon Gemara l'havi divrei ha'amoroim siyua l'Mishnah. It's not the way of the Gemara to bring a remark of the Amoroim as a support for the Mishnah. We just brought a Mishnah that said this. Why would we say V'chein Amar Rabba? V'yod Rabba talmidei de Rav Chisda have. And furthermore, Rabba is a student of Rav Chisda, and Rav Chisda is the one who is deciding this case. V'hechi Amar Rav Chisda shmaita mishmei. Why would Rav Chisda say a teaching in the name of Rabba? That also doesn't make sense. V'igar Aslein Rashi says, if you do have the text, V'chein Amar Rav Garsin, and the text should be that Rav says that, Shahaya Rabba Shal Rav Chisda, because at least Rav was the Rebbe of Rav Chisda. And Rashi continues, Mishum de'ikol mandamar b'Bava Basra. Now there is a mandamar in Bava Basra, lo shanu ela sheshivchu nechasim machmas nechasim, that it's only true if the property improves due to the property. Avol shivchu machmas atzman shel achim, but if the improvement is due to what the brothers are doing, then hishbichu li'atzman, then that improvement goes to them. So it's for that reason, Amar Rav Chisda lahad Rav. That's why Rav Chisda might bring Rav as a support. Hachal Amemar, he brings it over here to say, to les lana hishma, that we don't hold of that distinction. And even if the improvement is because of the efforts of those who did the improvement, like over here, the Shas al Pardes, again, where he essentially worked the land and caused it to improve, even in that situation, even in that situation, the improvement will be divided. But the Gemara continues, Amar le Abaya said back to him, Midami, can you really compare our case of Mari Barisik to the case of the Mishnah that we brought, which involved brothers who are adults and brothers who are minors? Because Hasam Gedolim Gabe Ketanim Yadi, over there, the Gedolim, the older brothers, they know about the younger brothers, they know about the minors. The Kamachli, and essentially they are mochel, they forgive whatever effort they put in, and they say they're going to split the improvements of the property. But Hachabot over here, Miyada Dalechel, did he even know about this brother, that he could forgive all the efforts that he put into improving the property? In any case, the Gemara continues, Igalgil Milsu Mata Lakame de Rabbi Ami. Eventually, this matter reached Rabbi Ami. Amar Lahu, he said to them, Gedolim Izu Amr. They actually say even greater than this. Because as Rabbi Ami says, Shaman Lam Karis, we find by an individual who is managing property of somebody who's a captive, that he gets paid like a sharecropper. He essentially does get paid for his efforts to improve the property. And so Hashta Didei Lo Yahavinale, so you think by Mari Barisik, when this is really his property, he's not managing somebody else's property, this is his property that he's managing, certainly he should be reimbursed for his efforts. And Rashi explains, Yadu Elu Shi'it Luchelkam, again in the case of the adult brothers and the minor brothers, they were aware of the brothers that were minors, they knew that they were going to take their portion. But over here by Mari Barisik Miyada Sheyesh Lo Achim, did he know that he had any brothers? And so then Rabbi Ami said, Gedolim Izu, we go even further than this. Karav Hayorid Lenichsei Shavei, let's say you have a relative that's managing the property of a captive, Shim Yavo Habaylam Yitlu Shalahem, that if the owners come, so they're going to take back their property. Amru Shaman Lahem Karis, we say still that person who managed the property gets to take a share, he's like a sharecropper. So Hachadidei Lo Yahavinale, so here where it's his property, you think you're not going to reimburse him for his efforts? Bitmiya, the Gemara is asking that as a question. Zesha Asav Yishbichan Ladas Atzmo, he's doing it to improve it, and again it's for himself, it's for his own property. Lo Yahavinan like Ka'aris Bechelik Hasheni, you don't think that he gets at least like a sharecropper in that other portion that's now going to his brother? And the Gemara continues, Hadrua Halakami de Rav Chisda, they returned this ruling of Rabbi Ami before Rav Chisda, and Amar Lu, he said back to them, Midami, can you really compare the two cases? Meaning, can you compare the case of somebody managing property of a captive to our case over here of Mari Barisik? Hasam Bereshus Nachis, over there the person was with the permission of the Bezdin, he's managing the property, that's why he gets paid like a sharecropper. But Hachabot over here by Mari Barisik La Bereshus Nachis, he has no permission, he just wasn't aware that there was a brother, and he was essentially taking this brother's property with no permission from the court. V'yod, and further Katan, who this brother of Mari Barisik at the time, he was a minor. Ve'in Moridin Karav L'nichsei Katan, you don't have a relative take care of the property like we said before. A relative is not supposed to manage the property of a Katan, of a minor. And so then the Gemara says, Adru Lakame de Rabbi Ami, they returned this response. They stated over this response of Rav Chisda back to Rabbi Ami. Amar Lu, he said to them, Lo Saimua Kame de Katan Hu. I didn't get all the details that this brother was a minor, and therefore I agree with what Rav Chisda is saying. And Rashi explains, Birshus Bezdin Nachti, again, this person person who is managing the property of the captive is doing it with the permission of the Bezdin, the Moridin Karav L'Nechsei Shaveh, that's a general halacha, again, that a relative manages the property of a captive. But Hacha Lo B'Rishus Nachas, here Mari Barisek had no permission from the Bezdin, K'Shiyarad Zelasocho Lo Nimlach Bebezdin, when he actually went down to manage the property, he didn't decide with Bezdin. V'yod, and further, in Bali Malach, even if he would have asked Bezdin, Lo Hayu Moridino, so they would not have had him take care of the property, because his brother was a katan, his brother was a minor. Vein Moridin Karav L'Nechsei Katan, and as we said earlier, you don't have a relative take care of the property of a minor. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Hamafkid Peiros Eitzel Chaveiro, if somebody is depositing produce by his friend, Hareza Yotzi Lo Chisronos, when he returns that produce, he deducts the standard amount of deterioration. We mentioned this idea earlier, and the standard amounts are as follows. It goes by a formula. Lachitim v'la orez, when it comes to wheat and rice, Tisha Chatzoi Kabin Lakor, it's 9.5 kabin per kor. We're going to say this is over the course of a year. La Sa'orn v'la Dochen, for barley and for millet, Tisha Kabin Lakor, it's 9 kav per kor. La Kusman ula Zera Pishtan, for spelt and for flaxseed, Shalosh Soyin Lakor, it's 3 saw for a kor. Hakol Lefi Hamida, everything is according to the amount, it's proportional to the amount that was deposited. V'hakol Lefi Azman, and everything goes according to the amount of time that has elapsed. Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says, V'chi ma ichbis lohen la'achborn, but what do the mice care? V'halo ochlos bein meharbe, vein mekim, aren't they going to eat the same amount, whether it's a lot or a little? Ela eno yotzi lo chesronos, rather these deductions are only made, ela l'kor echad bilvad, according to the amount of 1 kor. If it's more than 1 kor, we're not going to say that these deductions are proportional. And the Mishnah continues, Rabbi Yehuda, Omer Rabbi Yehuda says, Im haisa mida meruba, if a lot was deposited, eno motzi lo chesronos, you actually don't do any deductions, b'mnei shemor siros, because there's actually also an increase in the produce, as Rashi will explain, and therefore, due to the increase, that essentially offsets whatever deterioration there was. And Rashi explains, Hareza Yotzi Lo Chesronos, he deducts whatever the standard deterioration is. Kashiachzirim Lo, when he returns the produce to the owner, Yifchos Kamahim Regilim Lachzer, he deducts whatever the normal deterioration is. Uvegemara Muki Lo B'She'irvanim Peiros. The Gemara says that what's happening over here is he's mixing it up together with his produce. So essentially he just knows the amount that was deposited, and he has to figure out the amount that he is supposed to return. And Rashi continues, Orez meal, as we translated, it's rice, and Dochen Petil v'doma la'orez, Dochen is millet, it's similar to rice. Hakol lefi hamida, everything goes according to the amount that was deposited. V'chein l'chol kor v'kor, meaning it's proportional. For each kor, that's the amount that you deduct. And hakol lefi asman, it all goes according to the amount of time that has elapsed. Sheinichon biyadu l'chol shana v'shana, meaning each year that passes, yaniach lokach, that's the amount again that you're going to be deducting. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Amar, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says, hakol lefi hamida polling. He's arguing on this idea that it's proportional, that it goes according to the amount that was deposited. And finally, the Mishnah brought Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, that if it was a large deposit, you don't deduct at all. Shehifkid etzlo harbe, again, he deposited by him a lot. With a Gemara mefarish yud korim, the Gemara will explain that it's 10 kor. Lo yotzi lo chesronos, he doesn't deduct anything. Mimnei shehem mosiros, because they actually increase in size. Shabiyamos hagorin kashamafkid achitin yavation, when he deposits it, it's during the dry season and the wheat is dry. Uvimos hagashamim, and then in the rainy season, kashamachzer, when he's returning it, nofchos, it actually swells up, it increases in size. Uviachilas achborim einon nechsarim kalkach, when the mice eat from it, it doesn't go down that much. L'chol kor v'kor, for each kor it's just a little bit. To kuli hai lo achli achborim, because they don't eat so much, the mice. Miyur korin, from 10 kor, what they eat is very insignificant. Hilkach nefichasa mashlem es chisaron hamagia l'shnei korim o l'shlosha shachbor ochlin. So shachborim ochlin. So therefore, what happens is the amount that it increases in size actually ends up compensating for the amount that it loses because of the mice. And the Gemara says, Orez tuva chaser, doesn't rice deteriorate at a faster rate than what is listed in the Mishnah? And the Gemara says, Amar Rava bar Rachana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rava bar Rachana says that Rabbi Yochanan says, Ba'orez kol of shana, we're talking about rice which is shelled, that's what we're talking about in the Mishnah, and that's why it deteriorates at a slower rate. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. The Mishnah said, La kusmin ulazera pishtan, for spelt and for flaxseed, gimel soin lakor, it's 3 saw for a kor, that's the rate of deterioration over the period of a year. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rabbi Chia, Rabbi Yochanan said that Rabbi Chia said, Zera pishtan begevol and shana. What we're talking about in the Mishnah is the flax seed, and it's on the stalks. And the Gemara says, Tanya Nami Hachi, we have a brisa like this as well. La kusmin ulazera pishtan begevolin, for spelt and for flaxseed on the stalks. Villa oris she'eno kalif, and for rice that is not shelled. Again, that's not like our Mishnah. Our Mishnah is talking about shelled rice. For rice that is not shelled, the amount is shlosha soin lakor. It depreciates by 3 saw for every kor. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, Hakol Lefi Hamida V'chulu. The Mishnah said that it all goes by the measurement, meaning it's all proportional. As the Gemara now explains, Tana was taught, Kain L'chol Kor V'kor. That's what it is for each kor. V'chein L'chol Shana V'shana. And this is a yearly amount, so that's the amount that you have to deduct for each year. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri v'chulu. The Mishnah said that Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said, and the Gemara brings a brisa. Tanya, we learned in a brisa. Amru lo Rabbi Yochanan. They said to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri's argument essentially was that the mice will eat the same amount no matter how much there is. So just because you have more, you shouldn't deduct proportionally, because again, they're not going to eat more. And so the brisa is now saying they responded to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri as follows: Harbe ovdos mehen. A lot of this produce gets lost. Harbe mispazros mehen. A lot of the produce is scattered. It's not only mice, and that's why you have to do a proportional deduction. And the Gemara continues, Tana was taught, what are we talking about in our Mishnah? We're talking about where he mixed the produce up with his produce. That's why he has to do these calculations when returning the produce. But let's say he designated a specific corner where he's going to place this produce. So then, Omer Lo, then he could just say to the original owner, take what is yours, it's right before you, whatever it depreciated. There's no math that has to be done in that situation. But the Gemara continues, but 1 second, even if he mixed it up with his produce, what's the big deal? Why do we need a standard calculation? Why doesn't he just see how much he had, how much was deposited, and then just figure out how much it went down, and then you'll know how much the decrease was? And the Gemara says to that, well, b'mistapik mehem. The Gemara says, well, he actually took from that supply, he took for himself, so he doesn't really know how much there was. But the Gemara says, well, why not just see how much he took, how much he supplied himself from that supply? And the Gemara says to that, lo yadi kamistapik, he simply doesn't know how much he took, and so therefore he really doesn't know what was there, and you have to go by this standard deterioration rate. There's no other way to really calculate how much to return. And the Gemara continues, the Mishnah said, Rabbi Yehuda says, that if it's a large amount that was deposited, you actually don't deduct anything, because there is an increase that offsets whatever the decrease was. And the Gemara says, Kama mida meruba, how much is considered to be a large deposit? Amar Rabba bar bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabba bar bar Chana says that Rabbi Yochanan says, Asara kurin, it is 10 kor. Tanya nami hachi, we have a brisa like this as well. Kama mida meruba, how much is considered to be a large amount? Asara kurin, it is 10 kor. And the Gemara continues, Tani Tana Kame de Rav Nachman, the Tana taught before Rav Nachman, when is this true? Shemadad lo mitoch garno, that he measured it from the threshing floor, meaning when he gave it over to the person who's watching the produce, he did it from the threshing floor. V'hechzer lo mitoch garno, and then when he returned it to him, he also did the measurement from the threshing floor. Aval madad lo mitoch garno, but let's say the original measurement when it was given over to the shomer was taken in the threshing floor. V'hechzer lo mitoch beso, and then the returning is done and he's measuring from the house. The idea over here is that when they measure from the house, it's a more precise measurement. So then eino yotzi lo chesronos, then he doesn't have to deduct anything, because we can assume that what he's giving back from the house already, just the way they measure in the house, it actually is an increased amount, and that will offset any deductions. And that's the idea, memnesha mosiros, because again, there's an increased amount when you're returning it from the house. The Gemara says, Amar Lei said back then, v'chi b'shoftani askinan, are we dealing with idiots over here? The yahavi b'chayla rabba, that they give it in a large measurement, v'shakli b'chayla zuta, and then they take it back in a smaller measurement. No one is going to return it in different measurements than it was originally taken. And so the Gemara therefore says, Dilma bimos hagoren k'amrin. Maybe what you really mean to say is if it was during the time of the threshing. And it would mean as follows, B'amed devar mamurim, when is this true? Shemada lo bimos hagoren, if the measurement was made during the time of the threshing, v'hechzer lo bimos hagoren, and then it was returned at the time of the threshing, so then it's all done at the same time. There is no increase to offset the decrease, so then you have to deduct. Avol madad lo bimos hagoren, but if the measurement was initially made during the times of the threshing floor, v'hechzer lo bimos hageshamim, but then it was returned when it was already the rainy season, so again it was measured initially dry, and now it's the rainy season, there's an increase, so eino yotzi lo chisaron, so then he doesn't do any deductions, memnesha mosiras, because again then it increases as we have said. But the Gemara continues, Amarle Rapapa li Abaye, Rapapa said to Abaye, Im kain lifka kad, if it's really increasing, so why doesn't the container explode? Because it should swell in size. And the Gemara says to that, Hava uvdu, paka kad, there actually was a case like that, where the container actually did explode. And the Gemara says another answer, boy, same, if you want, I could say Mishum Itzit, so what happens is you have compression, meaning to say that it does expand, and now it's much more tightly packed than before, but it doesn't necessarily cause the container to explode. And Rashi explains, Zera Pishtan Bigivolin, if we're talking about the flaxseed on the stalk, so Chasr Kolkach, then it loses more, Lefisha Hagivolin Mesiyavshin, because the stalks dry up, Vinoflim, and it falls down, Varuach Menashvasan, and the wind blows it away. Aval Zera Pishtan Naki, but if you just have the flaxseed, Eino Chasr Kolkach, it's not going to depreciate that much. L'chol Kur V'Kur Perish Demasnis, and we're explaining the Mishnah, means to say proportionally for every kur, this is how much is lost. Lichzi Didei Kamahava V'Yira Kamachasr, why not just do a calculation? How much did he have initially? How much did it go down? And then you can just follow that amount again proportionally, just see how much was the total and how much went down, and deduct accordingly. Midas Hagor and Haisi Yisera al Shalbatim, when they measured at the threshing floor, it was a larger amount measured than when they did it at the house when it was more precise. The Gemara said, B'shuftani Shotim, are we dealing with idiots? B'chayla b'mida, are they measuring one way when they first deposit it? They measure a different way when they return it. Rather, what you mean to say is bimos hagoren samach liyovshan. That means at the time of the dry season, shenasiyavshu bechama, where it dried in the sun. So if it's given at that time, the hechser lo bimos hageshamim, then it's returned in the rainy season. Chazru v'nispechu milachluchas hageshem v'akor. Now it's already swelling up because of the rain and the cold. Imkein shadarkol l'tfoach. The Gemara then said, well, if it's going to swell up, lifka kada, so the container should explode. Kishemamalim karchitin osorm bimos hagoren. If they fill a jug with wheat or barley during the times of the threshing, v'gafin es ha'akad, and then they seal it, yifka because it swells, so the whole thing should explode. And so the Gemara answered there actually was a case where that's exactly what happened, or it could be itzitza, could be dochek, again it could be that is much more compressed. What happens is it's in a very narrow area, so it compresses together, and it doesn't swell up in that sense, but again it could be that it really is a larger volume. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Yotzi lo shasus liyayin, he deducts 1/6 for wine. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Chomesh, Rabbi Yehuda says he deducts 1/5. Yotzi lo shlosha lugin shemen lemeya, he deducts 3 lug of oil for every 100 lug of oil that is deposited. Lugu mechza shmarim, lugu mechza bella, that's comprised of 1 lug and a half of sediment and 1 lug and a half of that which is absorbed into the barrel. Imhaya shemen mizukak, if what was deposited was refined oil, so there is no sediment, so eino yotzi lo shmarim, so then he doesn't deduct the sediment. Imhayu kankanim yishanim, if it's older barrels which have already absorbed, they're not going to absorb further, eino yotzi lo bella, so then he does not deduct for the absorption. And the Mishnah continues, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Af ha-mocher shemen mezukak lechaveiro kol yemos hashana, even somebody who sells oil that is refined to his friend all year, hareze mekabel olav lugu mechza shmarim lemeir, the person who is buying it, he accepts upon himself that 1 lug and a half is going to be sediment for every 100 lug. And Rashi explains, Liyayin for wine, again, you're deducting 1/6 according to the Tanakama. What that means is, Im hifket etz lo yayin, let's say he deposits by the shomer, he gives him wine, v'irvu em yeno, and then the shomer mixes it up together with his wine, hakankan im bolin shasus, so the barrels, they absorb 1/6, so he can deduct that when he's returning it to the owner. And then the Mishnah said, according to Rabbi Yehuda, af ha-mocher v'chulu, even when someone sells, the buyer assumes that there's going to be a lug and a half of sediment. Keshem sha'amru b'mafkid, meaning, just like we say by someone who's depositing, kein amru b'mocher, the same is true by someone who's selling. Sha'amocher shemen l'chaver, if somebody sells oil to his friend, v'nosein lo mitochev yosef, and now he's giving to him, what it means is that he's going to supply him with oil all year, and he's going to supply him the oil from his barrels. Keshu mistapik tamid v'hu mizukak, and when he's constantly supplying himself, hare halokeach mekavel olav livchos lo lugu mechza machmas shvarm, the buyer is accepting upon himself that he's not going to get the full 100 lug, but he's going to deduct 1 lug and a half because there's sediment. In other words, he's giving him this refined oil. That's assuming that he's giving him with no sediment, and therefore 1 lug and a half of it could be sediment. He doesn't have to give him the full 100 lug of refined oil. He can give him 98 and a half lug of refined oil and give him 1 lug and a half of sediment. Lameya means lameya lug, again, for every 100 lug. And the Gemara says, Velo pligi, the Tanakam and Rabbi Yehuda and the Mishnah, they're not arguing. Marki Asri, each one is going by his locale. Biasri Demar Chafu Bekira, in the locale of the Tanakama, they use wax, they coat the barrels with wax. Velo Mai, it's Tfei, and so therefore it doesn't absorb so much. That's why we say by the wine it only loses 1/6. But Biasri Demar, but in the locale of Rabbi Yehuda, Chafu Bekufra, they coat the barrels with pitch, Umai, it's Tfei, and it absorbs more. That's why we deduct as much as 1/5. And the Gemara continues, if you want, I could say another approach, Mishum Gargishta, it has to do with the kind of earth that is used for the barrels, Ha Maitza Tvei, V'halo Maitza Tvei. In this person's area, it absorbs a little more. In that person's area, it doesn't absorb as much. And the Gemara continues, Bi'asri de Rav Yehuda, in the place of Rav Yehuda, Ramu arboim v'tamni kuze b'dana, there were 48 pitchers in every barrel. Azil dana b'shisa zuze, one barrel sold for 6 zuz. Rav Yehuda bought the barrel, and Paris Rav Yehuda shisa bezuza, he divided it up into 6 pitchers, and he sold each one for a zuz. And Rashi explains, Ramu arboin v'tmanya kuze b'dana, means to say, Mida ketana haisu b'mekomo, she'arboim u'shmona memalin es hachavis. This was a small measure that they had, let's say a pitcher. It was a small measure where 48 of these measures filled one barrel. Azil dana b'shisha zuzim haisanim kares b'yachad b'mos habotzir. In the time of the harvest, you would sell for 6 zuz, 1 barrel. And parim le Rav Yehuda shisa bezuza, nasa Rav Yehuda chanvani, meaning Rav Yehuda was a storekeeper. Mochran sheish kuze bezuz, and he would sell as 6 pitchers, each one for 1 zuz. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Mem Amud Beis.